Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Delighted to be joined by Thomas Kennedy, an activist down in Florida who has done a lot of things that Governor Ron DeSantis doesn't particularly like. He's been kicked out of quite a few press conferences because DeSantis does not want to answer any questions from real critics. But there's a real, in my view, scandal. It's not quite being covered the way I think it should be. Pertaining to Hurricane Ian, obviously devastation throughout a lot of southern Florida. And we know that in Lee County, where Fort Myers Beach is, the official toll they're saying right now is 54 dead. Obviously, it could be significantly more than that. But that is where there was an insane amount of storm surge flooding. Let me just show this one video to give you an idea. So that's just one example, and a lot of devastation. And this was aired on CNN yesterday. No way to confirm it, but pretty heartbreaking. If
their son's best friend is a Lee County sheriff. They're finding hundreds of bodies now.
That's what we're hearing.
It's not like 20s. It's hundreds of bodies now that they're getting in and looking.
It's so sad.
It's horrible. But our block, this block,
they're saying hundreds of bodies. Again, the official count is 54, but they're talking about potentially it could be a lot more than that. What's interesting about this is Lee County was in what they call the cone of the storm at least 96 hours before it hit. Here's just a map from the National Weather Service. So you see, that's most of Florida right there, but Fort Myers and Lee County would be kind of on the southwest part of that. Yet they did not evacuate until Tuesday morning, or not issue a mandatory evacuation until Tuesday morning, where neighboring counties evacuated a day earlier. So county officials kind of don't have a solid answer for that. And Governor DeSantis doesn't have a solid answer for that. Obviously, you would think, was in communication with the county officials. What's your reaction there? They didn't evacuate them until Tuesday morning when it was already too late.
Yeah, and I want to backtrack a little bit and start with the death toll. 54 people dead so far. I don't want to speculate, but so far is a lot, and it's especially a lot for a developed so-called first world country to be hit this hard and to have this many people die. And it really speaks to the lack of preparation, not just from the elected officials and so-called leaders in Florida, but beyond that, the terrible urban planning, the terrible development practices that plague our state, the lack of resilient infrastructure in the face of these devastating storms that are no longer once in a generation. This was not a one in a 500-year type of storm. We're seeing these type of storms hit, the Gulf region of Florida and the Caribbean all the time, every other hurricane season. So, it's just like a mask off moment, I think, for our state. Can you imagine if this storm would have hit Miami-Dade County, a Category 5? It would have leveled the city. Seriously, it leveled Fort Myers. Or if it would have hit directly Tampa, it would have been insane. And already what happened is insane, right? But, regarding to what you were saying, Ron DeSantis on the Friday before the storm was supposed to hit was at a high school football game. And you can go look that up. You can go look at that up in social media. He was at a high school football game. And I remember thinking, being like, wow, this is odd and strange, because Rick Scott, who was a horrible Florida governor that I had very little nice things to say about him, one thing that he did well was pretend to care every time a hurricane came. He would put in his little Navy cap and he would take every opportunity to be in front of a camera and get earned media. But they really, the state agencies and DeSantis were largely silent about the storm for, I think, about 18 hours, before the storm hit. And, today DeSantis was in a press conference saying that, we weren't on the cone of the storm, up to like 72 hours before the storm hit. No, that's not true. That we knew where the storm. Most spaghetti models showed that the storm was going to hit between the Tampa and Fort Myers area with a 92-hour head start. And again, the Tampa Bay area is an area that is extremely susceptible to flooding, to storm surge. Obviously, Fort Myers as well, as we could clearly see. And they got caught sleeping on it. They were overconfident. I mean, I honestly don't understand what happened, but it's just.
I mean, this is from the National Weather Service. This is 96 hours before. This is the cone of the storm. You clearly see, I mean, it's most of Florida, but you clearly see the Fort Myers area is within the cone. It looks like Miami is the only one not. Yet DeSantis, when pressed by CNN, kind of just produced a bit of a word salad. Let me show what he had to say to the CNN reporter.
Why do you stand behind Lee County's decision to not have that mandatory evacuation until the day before the storm?
Well, where was your industry station when the storm hit? Were you guys in Lee County? No, you were in Tampa. So that's, they were following the weather track, and they had to make decisions based on that. But, 72 hours, they weren't even in the cone. 48 hours, they were on the periphery. So you got to make the decisions the best you can. I will say, they delivered the message to people. They had shelters open. Everybody had adequate opportunity to at least get to a shelter within the county. But, a lot of the residents did not want to do that. I think probably for various reasons. Some people just don't want to leave their home, period. They're island people, whatever. But I think part of it was so much attention was paid to Tampa that I think a lot of them probably thought that they wouldn't get the worst of it. So, but they did. And I think it's easy to second guess them, but they were ready for the whole time and made that call when there was justifiable to do so.
Some of their neighboring counties, though, did have mandatory evacuations before Tuesday.
Well, right. But our neighboring, if you look at Tuesday morning, they had moved the track down. Models started showing it going to Sarasota, so so they did that. I was in Sarasota that day with them when they were expanding some of their evacuations. Charlotte, I think, did the same thing either Monday night or Tuesday morning. But don't forget Sunday, 11 a.m. advisory, it was going to go to Taylor County in North Florida. And so, at some point you got to look to see kind of where this thing is going. So, I think that it's easy to say in hindsight.
DeSantis very well. Is he just lying or is he confused? Because, I'm not a meteorologist, but I'm looking at the cone and it looks pretty clear that even if it wasn't going to be a direct hit on Fort Myers Beach, the storm surge was going to cause a lot of damage and possibly kill people.
Yeah, and something worth pointing out about that clip, small thing, but still worth noting, is that on his chest, he has his campaign symbol in his jacket, and he's there in his official capacity, through being paid through or tax dollars through the governor's office. So again, campaigning, with his campaign symbols, and we are paying for it. So really, really inappropriate, optics there, especially in the middle of a disaster. But look, I don't know what's going through his head, but all I can tell you is, what I just previously told you, that's wrong. It's not true. They had plenty of warning and, the models showed where the storm was going to go. It's true that most people thought that it was going to go to Tampa, but the storm started trending east days before it hit. So, and I will say that it's true that a lot of people choose to not evacuate because they don't have the financial capability to do so. They can't pay for gas. They can't miss work. A lot of people had to work, up to very close to when the storm hit. They can't afford hotels. They just can't afford to pick up their lives and, stay somewhere else for a couple of days while the storm hits, and not knowing when they're going to come back. So the financial feasibility for evacuation is not something that a lot of Floridians, unfortunately, can afford. And there's also the issue of a crumbling property insurance market here in Florida because of climate change, because of out of control litigation, because of loopholes in insurance regulation. We have an insurance market that poses a lot of liability for insurers, and we've had 6 companies go down in recent years. You know what I mean? And Floridians pay 3 times the amount, the national average, on property insurance premiums. So there's a lot of people that don't have flood insurance, that don't have property insurance, and are scared to leave their homes. You know what I mean? So they stay thinking that, well, like, I'm going to stay with my home, I'm going to stay with my belongings. And unfortunately, the lack of urgency from our elected officials reinforces that behavior. And then, when the storm hits, it's too late to get out. You know what I mean? And it's just really sad.
I want to read a little bit more because it is a lot. There's more specifics as to, not only county officials, but he's the governor, clearly dropped the ball here, and which, seems to have led to more people dying than should have. This is from the New York Times. But while the track of Hurricane Ian did shift closer to Lee County in the days before it made landfall, the surge risks the county faced, even with the more northerly track, were becoming apparent as early as Sunday night.
Yes.
And again, neighboring counties to Lee County evacuated Monday morning as a result of that. At that point, the National Hurricane Center produced modeling showing a chance of a storm surge covering much of Cape Coral and Fort Myers. Part of Fort Myers Beach, even in that case, had a 40% chance of a 6-foot-high storm surge, according to the surge forecasts. Why that's important? Lee County's evacuation plan, the county's plan proposes an initial evacuation is if there is even a 10% chance that a storm surge will go 6 feet above ground level based on a sliding scale. The plan also calls for an evacuation if there's a 60% chance of a 3-foot storm surge. Along with the forecast on Sunday night, updated forecasts on Monday warned that many areas of Cape Coral and Fort Myers had between a 10 and 40% chance of a storm surge above 6 feet. Well, they're supposed to evacuate if there's a 60% chance of a 3-foot storm surge. And here they were getting nearly a 40% chance of a 6-foot storm surge. You don't have to be a mathematician. There was clearly blinking red lights, which brings me to my next question. Most of the media, the national media in particular, they're framing on DeSantis in the terms of a potential 2024 run has been, well, he's a less toxic, more competent version of Trump. I don't think he's less toxic. And this is not competent. He's the governor, right? So sure, he might try to put it off on the counties. Well, this is what the county leadership decided, but he's the governor. If he says evacuate, they're going to follow his lead. This seems to be very incompetent considering, as we just showed, the National Weather Service was clearly saying Fort Myers was in pretty serious jeopardy.
Yeah, look, and the buck stops with the executive, right? And even it can go up to the federal level. Look, in 1991, when George H.W. Bush was running for re-election in Florida, a state that he had won by, I believe, over 20 points in his initial election, in 1991, he barely won it with 1%. And a lot of that is attributed to his response to Hurricane Andrew when Lawton Childs, a Democrat, was actually the governor, because he was very, very slow to mobilize FEMA and other federal resources into the state. You know what I'm saying? So, I compare that because, DeSantis, even though he's not even really trying to pass the buck here, he's actually defending these irresponsible local officials that displayed incompetence. He is the governor, right? Like you said, he is the one that sets the tone for the rest of the state. He can call those elected officials and, move them and get them to take action. But again, they were largely silent for days before the storm. Dude was at a high school football game. They were not taking the threat seriously. I have no idea why. I don't want to speculate why, but the reality is that we were not warned properly. we were underprepared, and the consequences are good to see. And I started this interview, right, talking about the larger lack of infrastructure and the development, the out of control development, irresponsible development that has led to these sorts of conditions in Florida. Because when you really take into account, it really should inform how you are going to react in times of emergency like this, right? What type of urgency you're going to take, because the reality is that Florida is built in swampland, in marshland, right? It's very prone to flooding, especially those communities that are built, are built in lakes, at sea level. I mean, just the responsibility is just breathtaking.
Right. And I also want to ask you about the Martha's Vineyard stunt. This was a couple of weeks ago, where Governor DeSantis somehow found it important to find migrants in Texas and then send them without their full understanding and knowledge to Martha's Vineyard, I guess, to own the libs. Well, the New York Times came out with a story yesterday with more information about, I guess, his person who helped him carry this out. Her name was Perla. This is from the New York Times. And in the middle of it all, a woman with a background in military counterintelligence who investigators believe was sent to Texas from Tampa in order to fill the planes. Until now, little has been known about the woman whom migrants said identified herself only by her first name, Perla, when she solicited them to join the flights. A person briefed on the San Antonio Sheriff's Office investigation into the matter told the New York Times that the person being looked at in connection with the operation is a woman named Perla Huerta. Ms. Huerta, a former combat medic and counterintelligence agent, was discharged in August after 2 decades in the U.S. Army that included several deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, according to military records. I don't want to speculate, but this woman from Tampa didn't just freelance this. Obviously, there was some coordination or communication with the governor's people. Besides just the kind of absurdity and cruelness of this, what does this say to you that DeSantis is plucking people right out of the military to go round up migrants?
Yeah, and another thing that this article pointed out, and other articles, is the corruption related to this, right? The fact that the vendor that was used and contracted by the state, had been previously represented by Matt Gaetz, had been previously represented by Larry Keefe, who's the guy that's in charge of immigration affairs for the DeSantis administration. The company had donated exclusively to Republican lawmakers, some who sat on the committee that was in charge of appropriating these $12 million for these, migrant flights and busing. So it's a tale of corruption, right? It's a tale of corruption and cronyism as well. But, I think, honestly, what they're trying to do here is they know that abortion and what's happening with reproductive rights is not an issue that they want to talk about because it polls so badly. So they're doing this to shift the conversation to immigration, where they can talk about the border and whatever. And they're using these people as political pawns in the process, right? As political toys. And it's really disgusting to watch, especially because there's stories now about how Venezuelan migrants and other migrants are being brought into Florida to help with the disaster relief and reconstruction, right? So, the hypocrisy is disgusting. And again, the fact that, we're spending $12 million that could be spent, helping Floridians, assisting them to do this, to migrants with their children. There were children on those flights, picking them up like cattle, dropping them off. It's just gross. There was an article in the New Yorker that is the account of one of these from a 27-year-old man who was in one of these flights. And it details how they were, picked up in a black van after they were dropped off, in Martha's Vineyard. And they basically drove them there in black vans, told them to get out, and just left them there in Martha's Vineyard at someone's house. And then they just started crying because they didn't know what was going to happen. They realized that they had been lied to, that all the promises of jobs, of legal help were not going to come into fruition. I mean, how disgusting. And the question that reporters, in my opinion, need to ask DeSantis is this. If it was Casey DeSantis, your wife, and your children that were lied to like that in a moment of desperation and vulnerability, were put into a flight and dropped off like cattle in an unfamiliar place with zero support, would you think that's okay? And would you think it's funny? And I don't think he would say yes.
I mean, I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not exactly sure if there won't be legal repercussions, because I don't know what legal grounds they had to do this in another state and bring these people, from Texas to Massachusetts, when Florida, as far as I know, doesn't have, a major border problem with Alabama and Georgia. So it seems legally murky what he did.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Texas, a Texas sheriff's office is investigating into it. Massachusetts is calling for a criminal investigation. A Florida state senator filed a lawsuit in regards to this. There's going to be further letters from Florida lawmakers calling on the Department of Justice and the Department of Transportation at the federal level to look into this. But the reality is, you're correct, Jordan. Immigration is a federal issue that is, handled solely by the federal government. It's insane to have a state government transporting migrants between Texas to Florida to Massachusetts, purely for like political theater. And beyond that, Florida passed 2 anti-immigrant bills, one in 2019 and one earlier this year. And they basically restrict the state of Florida from using state funds and state agencies to aid migrants into sanctuary jurisdictions. So even, according to their own laws, they're misusing state funds and state resources for this sort of cheap political theater. So, I think at the bare minimum, an injunction needs to be placed immediately on the Florida Department of Transportation and whatever else agency to stop the use of these funds, because it's obviously inhumane and cruel what they're doing, but just from a legal standpoint, it's unethical and inappropriate, and they're not being good stewards of our money either. That money could have been used for a lot better purposes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Thomas Kennedy. Appreciate it. We'll stay in touch.
No, thank you, man.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.